A millionaire disguises himself as a garbage collector to test his fiancée and regrets what he discovers. All it took was swapping his suit for a uniform to become invisible in her eyes. Called trash by the woman who claimed to love him, he heard his own fiancée order the firing of anyone who showed compassion. On the wedding day, she found the groom at the altar and all the evidence of her own cruelty. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know what city you're watching from. Now, on with the story. Philip Miller had always believed that success was built on honest work and respect for others. At 38, he had a solid career as the director of operations for one of the largest tech firms in New York City. His name was synonymous with integrity in the industry. Colleagues and competitors respected him not just for his competence, but for the way he treated people, regardless of their job title or social standing. Philip was the kind of guy who greeted the doorman by name, who would stop to listen to the concerns of the cleaning staff, and who would never allow anyone to be belittled in his presence. Life seemed to be finally falling into place. After years dedicated exclusively to his career, he met Megan Vance at a corporate event on the Upper East Side. She was a public relations executive for a major cosmetics brand with a striking presence, an easy smile, and an eloquence that could charm any audience. The daughter of a traditional New York family, Megan moved effortlessly among business leaders, artists, and politicians. Her events were always highlights in the society pages. Philip was drawn not only to her beauty, but to the apparent harmony of values they shared. In the first few months of their relationship, everything seemed perfect. Megan was attentive, affectionate, and showed genuine interest in Philip's projects. She accompanied him to business dinners, made a point of getting to know his partners, and attended charity events by his side. Friends and family remarked that they were an inspiring couple. Philip's mother, Helen, a simple woman who had raised her son alone working as a seamstress, was enchanted with Megan. Her future mother-in-law was always greeted with flowers and kindness. After a year and a half together, Philip proposed to Megan during a trip to the Berkshires. It was a magical moment, complete with live musicians and a breathtaking view of the mountains. She said yes through tears of joy, and the news spread quickly through their social circles. The wedding preparations began immediately. Megan wanted a grand ceremony in the chapel of a historic country inn just outside of New York, followed by a reception for over 300 guests. It was during these preparations that the first cracks began to appear. One Saturday afternoon, Philip and Megan visited the catering hall that would handle the reception. The venue was elegant, with spacious ballrooms and sophisticated decor. They were greeted by the owner, a middle-aged woman named Sylvia, who guided them through the spaces with professionalism and warmth. During the tour, one of the waiters, a young man with a simple appearance, accidentally bumped into Megan while passing with an empty tray. He apologized immediately, embarrassed. Philip expected Megan to reassure the young man, as she certainly would have in a more public setting. But what happened next surprised him. Megan turned to the waiter with a look of disdain Philip had never seen before. She didn't say anything at that moment, but when Sylvia stepped away for a few minutes, she commented in a low voice, yet loud enough for the young man to hear, that this type of employee was a problem, that they lacked proper training and shouldn't be allowed near the clients. The waiter lowered his head and quickly walked away. Philip felt a pang of discomfort, but chose not to say anything. Maybe Megan was just stressed with all the wedding details. A few days later, they were in a decor shop choosing the final arrangements for the ceremony. The saleswoman, a woman in her 50s, was showing them flower options when Megan interrupted her sharply, saying that her suggestions were mediocre and that she expected something more sophisticated from a store of that caliber. The saleswoman was visibly flustered, but maintained her composure and offered other alternatives. Megan barely looked at her as she spoke, scrolling on her phone and sighing with impatience. Philip tried to smooth things over, thanking the saleswoman and saying they would come back later when they had more time. When they left the store, he mentioned carefully that Megan had been a bit harsh with the employee. She laughed it off as if it were nothing and said there was no time to waste being polite to people who were paid to do a job. Philip felt a tightness in his chest, but again tried to justify it. Maybe Megan was just tired, After all, planning a wedding was exhausting, but the incidents kept happening. At a dinner at Megan's parents' house, Philip watched how she treated the housekeeper who was serving the table. The woman, who had a humble demeanor and a quiet voice, stumbled while pouring wine and spilled a few drops on the tablecloth. Megan reprimanded her harshly, saying it was unacceptable and that she would have a serious talk with her mother about the quality of the service. The housekeeper apologized several times, her eyes welling up with tears. Megan's father didn't even look up from his plate. Her mother just nodded, as if this were routine. Philip felt uncomfortable for the rest of the meal. Later that night, when they were alone in the car, he gently brought it up. Megan sighed, clearly irritated, and said that Philip needed to understand that certain people needed clear boundaries or they wouldn't take their jobs seriously. She spoke as if she were giving a lesson in personnel management. Philip fell silent, but something inside him began to shift. In the following weeks, he started watching Megan more closely, and what he saw deeply disturbed him. When they were in settings with important people, Megan was flawless. Polite with business leaders, charming with Philip's friends, gracious with the partners' wives. But when the audience changed, when the person she was talking to was a valet, a delivery guy, or a store clerk, her tone changed completely. It wasn't just coldness, it was contempt. A subtle but undeniable contempt. One morning, Philip forgot his phone at home and went back to get it before heading to work. As he entered the apartment they shared, he heard Megan on the phone with a friend. She was talking about an acquaintance who had hired a nanny. The conversation was casual, but what caught Philip's attention was how Megan referred to the nanny. She called the woman ignorant, said that these people always think they can give opinions on how to raise their employers' children, and laughed as she recounted how her friend had been firm in putting the nanny in her place. Philip stood frozen in the hallway, unseen, listening to every word. He felt a lump in his throat. That night, lying next to Megan, Philip couldn't sleep. The images of the past few months played in his mind like a movie. Every acid comment, every disdainful glance, every moment Megan had treated someone as inferior. And the worst part was realizing he had tried to ignore the signs. He had justified, minimized, and made excuses. But now he could no longer pretend he didn't see it. Philip grew up in a humble neighborhood in Queens. His mother, Helen, worked as a seamstress, waking before sunrise and only resting late at night. She never had much, but she always taught her son that dignity has no price and that no one is better than anyone else. Philip remembered the times his mother shared her lunch with neighbors who were struggling, or when she would stop to chat with the man who sold popsicles on the corner, even after an exhausting day of work. Helen had little formal education, but she had something Philip now realized Megan lacked: humanity. How had he let things get this far? How had he not seen it before? Or had he seen it and simply chosen to ignore it because he was in love with the image Megan projected? The next morning, Philip woke up certain that he needed answers. He couldn't get married without truly knowing who the woman beside him was. But how could he find out? If he confronted Megan directly, she would deny it, justify herself, maybe even convince him he was overreacting. Philip needed something concrete. He needed to see, without any filters, how Megan behaved when she thought no one important was watching. That's when an idea began to form in his mind. A bold, perhaps even radical idea, but it seemed like the only way to be sure. Over the next few days, Philip started planning. He remembered a business trip he had scheduled 2 weeks from now, an international tech conference in Miami that would last 10 days. Megan already knew about the trip and had even joked that she would use the time to finalize the last wedding. Preparations without his interference. It was the perfect opportunity. Philip decided he wouldn't go to Miami, at least not in the way Megan imagined. He would disappear temporarily and take on a new identity. He would become invisible. He would experience firsthand what it was like to be treated as inferior. And most importantly, he would observe Megan from an angle she would never imagine possible. The idea was risky, maybe even absurd, but Philip felt it was the only way to uncover the truth. It wasn't just about suspicion anymore. It was about being certain before committing the rest of his life to someone who might not be who he thought she was. In the days leading up to the supposed trip, Philip began to prepare. He bought simple clothes from neighborhood stores, worn-out baseball caps, old pants. He researched disguises, watched videos on theatrical makeup. He shaved the well-trimmed beard he always maintained and let a scruffy, unkempt one grow in. He bought a short, graying wig, completely different from his dark, well-cut hair. He got colored contacts that changed his eye color. He acquired makeup to age his face, create wrinkles, and change his skin's texture. The preparation was meticulous. Philip studied the posture of manual laborers, how they walked, talked, and carried themselves in corporate environments. For days he observed the cleaning staff in his own building, paying attention to every detail. He noticed how invisible they were to most people, how they moved through hallways unnoticed, how their presence was ignored in elevators and waiting rooms. It was as if they didn't exist. Philip also needed to ensure his absence was believable. He updated his social media in advance, scheduling posts for the days he would supposedly be in Miami. He created a detailed story about the conference, memorized the names of fictitious keynote speakers, and prepared answers for any potential questions from Meghan. There could be no loopholes. She had to believe completely that he was on the other side of the country. Furthermore, Philip discreetly installed additional security cameras in the apartment he shared with Meghan. It wasn't to spy on her movements, but to have a security backup in case something happened. He also prepared a small recording device that he would carry with him during his disguise hidden in his work clothes. If he witnessed something important, he would need concrete proof. He spent hours practicing in front of the mirror. The transformation was stunning. When he put on the simple clothes, the wig, the fake beard, hunched his shoulders, and changed his posture, he became someone else. An ordinary, invisible man, the kind Meghan wouldn't even look at twice. He tested the disguise by going to places where he might run into acquaintances. He walked through the lobby of his building, went into cafes he used to frequent. No one recognized him. It was like he had become a ghost. But the preparation wasn't just physical. Philip needed to prepare himself emotionally for what he might discover. What if it was all just paranoia? What if Meghan was exactly who he always thought she was, and he was creating a narrative based on misunderstandings? Part of him wished that were the case. He wanted to be wrong, for it all to be an exaggeration of his tired mind. But another part, the more honest part, knew he wasn't imagining things. The signs were there, too clear to be ignored, and this doubt, this corrosive uncertainty, was exactly what motivated him to go to such lengths. Because if he was going to get married, to commit his life to someone, he needed to be absolutely sure who that person was when the doors closed and the spotlights turned off. One of the last nights before the trip, Philip had dinner with Meghan at an Italian restaurant in Greenwich Village. She was particularly cheerful, talking about the final wedding details, showing him pictures of decorations on her phone, laughing at funny stories about her friends. Philip watched her with a mixture of affection and melancholy. Was there still love there? Yes, there was. But there was also a growing sense of estrangement, as if he were looking at a stranger. During dinner, the waitress, a friendly young woman, brought the wrong order to the table. She had mixed up Philip's dish with another customer's. The woman apologized profusely, visibly embarrassed. Philip smiled and said it was no problem, that these things happen, but Meghan insisted on calling the manager. She said that kind of mistake was unacceptable, that the restaurant was losing its standards, and that she expected something to be done about it. The waitress stood there, staring at the floor, while the manager apologized repeatedly. Philip felt ashamed. Ashamed to be there. Ashamed to be associated with that. When they left the restaurant, he tried to talk to Meghan about it, but she just shrugged and said he was too nice to people, that it was admirable, but sometimes people needed boundaries. Philip didn't reply. He just held her hand as they walked to the car, feeling an immense weight in his chest. That night, as Meghan slept beside him, Philip lay awake for hours. He stared at the ceiling, at the shadows dancing on the walls, and wondered how he had reached this point. He remembered when he first met Meghan, how he had been captivated by her intelligence, the way she handled complex conversations, the passion with which she spoke about her projects. Where was that woman now? Or had she never really existed? And what Philip had seen was just the public version, the rehearsed performance? He also thought of his mother. Helen had liked Megan, but Philip wondered if she truly approved of the marriage or if she just wanted to see her son happy. His mother was too wise not to notice certain things. Maybe she had seen what Philip was just beginning to see, but had chosen to remain silent, trusting her son to make his own decisions. Philip got out of bed carefully so as not to wake Megan and went out to the balcony. New York was quiet at that hour of the morning, just the distant hum of a few cars cutting through the night. He looked out at the city he loved so much, at the lights twinkling in the distance, and felt a mix of determination and fear. He was about to embark on something that could change everything. There was no going back once he started. The truths he discovered couldn't be ignored or forgotten. He returned to bed and finally managed to sleep, but his dreams were restless, filled with confusing images and the sensation of falling. On the day of the trip, Philip said goodbye to Megan at the airport with a long kiss. She was beaming, already making plans for the days he'd be away. Philip checked in, went through security, but instead of boarding the plane to Miami, he discreetly slipped out of the airport through a service exit he had located earlier. He took a cab to a small apartment he had rented in the Bronx, far from anywhere he might be recognized. There he would begin his new temporary life. That night, alone in the modest apartment, Philip looked at his reflection in the mirror. He didn't recognize himself, and in a way, that was exactly what he needed. Because now, invisible to the world he knew, he could finally see the truth without any masks. Tomorrow, he would start working as a janitor for a contracting company that provided services to various condos and offices in Midtown Manhattan. He had gotten the job through a discreet contact, someone who didn't ask questions. And one of the places he would be working was the very building where Megan's office was located. Philip knew the next few days would be difficult, but he had to do this. He had to know who the woman he planned to spend the rest of his life with really was. And if the suspicions he carried in his heart were confirmed, he would have to make the hardest decision of his life. He lay down on the small, hard bed, so different from the king-size bed he shared with Megan, and tried to sleep. But sleep was slow to come. His mind wouldn't stop spinning, imagining what he would discover, fearing the answer that deep down he already suspected he knew. Outside, the city of New York pulsed on, indifferent to the personal dramas of its millions of inhabitants. The lights of the buildings glittered against the dark sky, cars honked, people laughed and cried in their own private worlds. And there, in that small, quiet apartment, Philip Miller prepared for a journey that would change his life forever. He didn't know it yet, but the coming days would reveal much more than he expected. Not just about Megan, but about himself, about the society he lived in, about the true nature of people when they believe no one is watching, and when it all came to light, there would be no turning back. Because some truths, once discovered, can never be forgotten. Philip closed his eyes and finally drifted off to sleep. He dreamed of his mother, of the neighborhood where he grew up, of the lessons of dignity he learned as a child, and when he woke up hours later, he knew he was ready to face the truth, whatever it might be. The alarm went off at 4:30 a.m. Philip opened his eyes and for a brief moment forgot where he was, the low ceiling, the peeling paint on the walls, the thin mattress. Then reality hit him like a cold wave. Today, his new, temporary life began. He got up and went to the small bathroom. In the mirror, his face was still his own. But in less than an hour, he would be someone else. He began the transformation with meticulous care. First, the makeup, darkening the circles under his eyes, creating wrinkles around his eyes and mouth. Then the grey wig, adjusting each strand until it looked natural. The scruffy fake beard, the colored contacts that changed his dark brown eyes to a light, almost grayish brown. Finally, the clothes. Faded jeans, a worn-out t-shirt, scuffed sneakers. When he was done, he looked in the mirror again. The person staring back was a stranger, a tired-looking man, hunched by the invisible weight of a hard life. Philip Miller was gone. In his place was Joe Smith, 45 years old, a janitor. He left the apartment at 5:15, The streets were still empty save for a few early morning workers waiting at bus stops. Philip took the subway from the nearest station. It was packed even at that hour. People crammed together, their faces marked by fatigue, their gazes lost in the distance. Philip had never taken the subway at this time. His routine always started later, with the comfort of the company car and driver. Now, pressed between sweaty bodies and heavy bags, he was experiencing a reality that had always been there, but one he had never truly lived. He got off at Grand Central Station and walked to the cleaning company's office. It was an old building on a side street, with peeling paint and an air of neglect. On the third floor, a small room served as the employees' base. There were about 20 people there, mostly middle-aged women, a few young people, and a handful of men. They all wore blue uniforms with the company logo on the back. Philip was greeted by Mr. Davis, the supervisor, a thin man in his 50s with a stern expression. He handed Philip a uniform and a list of locations where he would be working throughout the week. Philip's name was listed as Joe Smith, and no one questioned it. Mr. Davis quickly explained the duties: sweep, mop, clean bathrooms, empty trash cans, polish glass. No talking to the building occupants. No long breaks, no complaints. If a client complained, he'd get a warning. 3 warnings, and he was fired. The first job site was a law firm on Park Avenue. Philip was assigned to work alongside Ms. Rose, a black woman with graying hair and a kind smile. She was in her 60s and had worked there for over 15 years. On the way to the building, she spoke to Philip in a motherly way, giving him tips on how to avoid trouble, which lawyers were the most demanding, and where the cleaning supplies were kept. The work was exhausting. Philip spent the morning sweeping offices, cleaning windows, and carrying heavy buckets of water and cleaning products. His back ached and his hands grew rough. But the physical strain wasn't the worst part. It was the invisibility. He walked down the hallways and people simply didn't see him. Lawyers on the phone would walk right past him without even moving aside. Secretaries hurried by as if he were part of the furniture. Interns laughed loudly in groups, not caring if they were blocking the space where he needed to work. Philip had to shrink himself, dodge, and wait. And no one ever said, "Excuse me." No one said, "Thank you." No one acknowledged his presence. In the afternoon, Philip was assigned to clean the women's restroom. He knocked on the door, announced his presence, waited a few seconds, and went in. He was scrubbing a toilet when a young lawyer rushed in. She stopped, looked at Philip with a barely concealed expression of disgust, and said sharply that he should have waited longer before entering, that it was an invasion of her privacy, and that she was going to complain to his supervisor. Philip apologized, explaining that he had followed protocol. She didn't want to hear it. She slammed the door on her way out. Ms. Rose, who had witnessed the scene from the hallway, placed a hand on Philip's shoulder. She told him not to let it get to him, that it was always like this, that people thought they had the right to treat those who earned less poorly. Philip felt a lump in his throat, not because of the humiliation itself, but because he realized this was a daily reality for so many people. At the end of the day, exhausted, Philip returned to his apartment. He took off the uniform, removed the disguise, and stared at himself in the mirror. It had only been one day, and he already felt different. More humble, more aware, more vulnerable. But the real test was yet to come. Tomorrow, he would be working in the building where Megan's office was. The next morning, Philip woke up with a knot in his stomach. He went through the usual transformation, put on the uniform and headed to work. The office building, where Megan worked, was modern, with a mirrored glass facade and a marble lobby. Philip had been there dozens of times, always well-dressed, always greeted by the security guards, always welcomed with smiles by the receptionists. Today, entering through the service door at the back of the building, everything was different. The security guard didn't even look up as he passed. The cleaning supervisor, a woman with a shrill voice named Lucy, handed out assignments curtly. Philip would be responsible for floors 12 through 15, including the 13th, where Megan's public relations firm was located. He took the service stairs, carrying the cart with his cleaning supplies. The stairs were narrow and poorly lit, a stark contrast to the mirrored elevators in the main lobby. When he reached the 13th floor, he paused for a moment before opening the door. On the other side was Megan, his fiancée, The woman he planned to marry in just a few weeks. He took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The office was spacious, with glass partitions separating the workstations. There were about 20 people there, all well-dressed, working on computers or talking on the phone. Philip started at the back, sweeping discreetly, emptying trash cans, trying not to draw attention. Then he saw her. Megan was in her private office, a glass cube in the corner. She was wearing a navy blue dress that Philip knew well. She was on the phone, laughing, gesturing, beautiful as always. Philip felt his heart clench. For a second, he almost forgot why he was there. Almost. He worked in silence, always keeping an eye on her. Megan left her office a few times, talked to colleagues, got coffee from the break room. Not once did she look at Philip. He was invisible to her, just like all the other cleaning stuff, until it happened. Philip was cleaning the water cooler near Megan's office when she walked by carrying some documents. He turned at the same moment she passed, and his elbow lightly brushed against her arm. It was a minimal touch, almost imperceptible. But Megan stopped dead in her tracks. She turned to Philip with a look of profound irritation. She looked him up and down with obvious disdain and said, in a tone that could cut glass, "Pay attention to what you're doing. You think you can just bump into people around here?" Philip muttered an apology, lowering his head. Megan rolled her eyes and walked back to her office. A few of her colleagues snickered. Philip stood there holding the cleaning cloth, feeling a mix of pain and anger. This was how she treated people she considered inferior, without respect, without humanity, without the slightest bit of kindness. Over the course of the week, Philip continued to work in that building, and every day he saw more. He saw how Megan spoke to the receptionists when she thought the service was too slow. He saw how she treated the delivery guys who brought lunch. He saw how she referred to the cleaning staff in conversations with colleagues, as if they were a necessary nuisance. On one particularly difficult day, Philip was cleaning the men's restroom when he heard voices outside. He recognized Megan's voice. She was talking to a colleague about the wedding. She said she was excited, that she couldn't wait, that Philip was perfect. The colleague asked if she was nervous. Megan laughed and said no, that she was absolutely sure, that Philip was exactly the kind of man she had always wanted. Successful, respected, someone who valued her. Philip stood frozen inside the stall, listening to every word. There was genuine love in her voice when she spoke of him, or was there? Or was it just the usual performance, the image she cultivated? He didn't know anymore. But then the conversation shifted. The colleague mentioned a new janitor who had started that week. Megan made a snide remark about how sloppy the man was, how annoying it was to have him walking around the office. The colleague laughed and agreed. They walked away, talking about other things. Philip came out of the stall a few minutes later once. He was sure they were gone. He looked at his reflection in the bathroom mirror. The tired-looking man staring back at him seemed to have aged years in just a few days. The discoveries continued. Another day, Philip was in the service elevator when Megan rushed in, talking on her phone. She didn't even notice him there, huddled in the corner with his cleaning cart. The conversation was with someone named Richard. The tone was intimate, affectionate. Megan was laughing in a different way, more relaxed, more genuine. She said she missed him, that she couldn't wait to see him. Again, that she had to be discreet because Philip was traveling but would be back soon. Philip felt the floor drop out from under him. He gripped the cleaning cart to keep from stumbling. Megan continued her conversation, oblivious to his presence, confirming a date for the weekend. When the elevator stopped at her floor, she got out, still on the phone, without ever having looked at Philip. He stood there, alone in the elevator, processing what he had just heard. Infidelity. Megan was having an affair, and worse, she was setting up dates while she thought Philip was on the other side of the world. The betrayal hurt, but in a strange, almost distant way, as if he had been expecting it, as if it were just one more confirmation of something he already knew. In the following days, Philip watched more closely. He saw messages on Megan's phone when she left it on her desk. He saw how she dressed up in a special way on certain days. He saw the secret smiles when she checked her phone. Each discovery was a stab in the heart, but also a validation. He wasn't crazy, he wasn't exaggerating. Everything he suspected was real. But Philip also saw other things. He saw how the cleaning staff supported each other, how Ms. Rose shared her lunch with colleagues who had forgotten to bring food, how Mr. Davis, despite his sternness, had his employees' backs when clients were being unfair. He saw humanity where he least expected to find it. One afternoon, Ms. Rose asked Philip if he was okay. She said he looked sad, burdened. Philip didn't know what to say. How could he explain what he was going through? Ms. Rose placed a hand on his shoulder and said that whatever weight he was carrying, he wasn't alone. That everyone there carried their own pain, but together they were stronger. Philip felt his eyes burn. This woman who earned minimum wage, who woke up at 4 every morning, who was treated as invisible by most people, had more compassion and dignity than many of the executives he knew. More than Megan, certainly. 2 weeks passed. Philip had enough material. Discreet videos recorded by the small device hidden in his uniform, audio of revealing conversations, testimonies he had asked colleagues for about how they were treated, and his own experience, visceral and transformative. He knew he had to end this soon. The longer he spent in this double life, the harder it was to maintain the separation between who he was and who he was pretending to be. He was starting to feel truly invisible, truly small, truly insignificant. And that scared him. On the last Friday of that second week, Philip decided it was time. He sent a message to Megan from his real phone saying the conference had ended early and he would be back the next day. She replied with heart emojis saying she missed him like crazy and couldn't wait to see him. That night, Philip worked late. When the office emptied out, he was alone on the floor where Megan worked. He looked through the glass window of her office, saw the organized desk, the picture frames with photos of the two of them, the already printed wedding invitations stacked in a box. He thought about everything he had experienced in the past 2 weeks, the physical exhaustion, the humiliation, the invisibility. But he also thought about the lessons he had learned, about empathy, about dignity, about the true character of people. He thought about Megan, the woman he had met and loved, the woman he discovered she truly was, and he realized he could never marry someone like that. It didn't matter how much he loved her or how much time they had invested in the relationship. He couldn't spend his life with someone who treated human beings like disposable objects. But he also knew that simply ending the relationship wouldn't be enough. Megan needed to see. She needed to understand. She needed to face the consequences of her actions. And the world needed to know who she really was behind the carefully constructed facade. Philip had a plan, a bold and risky plan. But he was willing to see it through, because this was no longer just about him and Megan. It was about all the invisible people who were mistreated daily. It was about exposing the hypocrisy, the lack of empathy, the elitism that hid behind polite smiles and expensive clothes. He left the building for the last time as Joe Smith. He thanked Ms. Rose, who hugged him tightly and said she would miss him. Philip said he would never forget her, and it was true. He said goodbye to Mr. Davis and the other colleagues. They didn't know who he really was, but they had treated him with more dignity than many people who knew his true identity. Back at the rented apartment, Philip removed the disguise for the last time. He packed away the work clothes, the wig, the fake beard. He organized all the material he had collected, videos, audio, notes. He prepared everything for what was to come. Tomorrow, he would be Philip Miller again, but he wouldn't be the same man who had left 2 weeks ago. This man knew a truth that could not be unknown. He had seen the world from an angle that most people in his social class would never see, and he was ready to do something with that knowledge. The wedding was scheduled for 3 weeks from then. There was a pre-wedding event, a celebration with close family and important friends. It would happen there. That would be the moment when everything would come to light. Philip looked out the window of the small apartment, watching the city wake up once more. The sun was rising, painting the sky orange and pink. A new day, a new beginning, and soon, a new end to the life he knew. He was scared, yes, but he was also at peace, because he finally knew the truth. And the truth, however painful, would always be better than living a lie. JFK Airport was bustling that Saturday morning. Philip walked through international arrivals carrying only a carry-on bag, as if he had just arrived from Miami. He had planned every detail. He had posted old photos from the Miami airport on social media minutes before his fictitious return flight. He bought a few souvenirs from import shops to make the story more believable. He was exhausted, but not from a flight he never took. He was exhausted from the weight of the last 2 weeks. Megan was waiting for him outside the arrivals area. When she saw him, her face lit up. She ran to him and hugged him tightly. Philip hugged her back, but felt a vast distance between them, as if an ocean separated them even as they held each other. Megan smelled of the perfume he knew so well. She wore a light-colored dress that made her look even more beautiful. She seemed genuinely happy to see him. On the way home, Megan talked non-stop about everything that had happened in his absence. The final wedding preparations, an important meeting at work, a dinner with her friends. Philip listened in silence, watching her from the corner of his eye. On the surface, she was the same old Megan, but now he knew the layers hidden beneath. When they got to the apartment, Philip excused himself, saying he was exhausted from the trip and needed to rest. Megan understood, kissed him affectionately, and said she would make something special for dinner. Philip lay down on the bed and stared at the ceiling. He was back in his life, but everything felt strange and out of place, as if he no longer belonged in this luxurious apartment, on this comfortable bed, in this privileged life. For the next few hours, he forced himself to act normally. He had dinner with Megan, talked about the fictitious conference and showed her the souvenirs he'd bought. She was radiant, making plans for the week, showing him the latest decisions about the party decorations. Philip nodded, smiled when necessary, but inside he was planning every step of what was to come. On Sunday, they visited Helen. Philip's mother had prepared a lavish lunch, as she always did when her son came to visit. Sitting at the table in her simple house in Queens, Philip observed the interaction between his mother and Megan. Helen was polite, cordial, but Philip noticed something he'd never seen before, a certain reservation in his mother's eyes when she spoke to her future daughter-in-law. Had she always seen what he was just beginning to see? After lunch, while Megan was in the bathroom, Helen pulled Philip into the kitchen. She held her son's hands and asked with that directness only mothers have, "Are you happy, son? Truly?" Philip was speechless for a moment. He wanted to tell her everything, to vent, to ask for advice, but he just squeezed his mother's hands and said he was fine. Helen looked deep into his eyes, as if she could read his soul, and said, "Whatever is going on, you know you can always count on me. And remember, character is what you show when no one's looking." Those words echoed in Philip's mind the entire way home. The following week was torture. Philip went back to work, resumed his meetings, his projects, but he was constantly distracted, his mind drifting back to the images of the past 2 weeks. He saw the faces of Ms. Rose, of Mr. Davis, of all the invisible workers he had met, and he saw Megan's face, the way she had treated him when she thought he was just a janitor. During that week, Philip prepared everything meticulously. He edited the videos and audio he had recorded, organizing them into a clear, impactful sequence. He prepared a flash drive with all the material. He also compiled written testimonies from some of his work colleagues, who, after he revealed his true identity in private conversations, agreed to share their experiences of how they were treated in the building where Megan worked. He spoke discreetly with some of the partners at his firm. He told a few close friends part of what he was about to do, asking for their support for the changes he planned to implement afterward. Not everyone understood. Some thought he was being too radical, but others, especially those who came from more humble backgrounds, understood perfectly. Philip also consulted a trusted lawyer and prepared all the necessary documents to officially break off the engagement. He cancelled contracts with wedding vendors, personally covering all the fines and costs. He didn't want anyone but himself to bear the financial consequences of what he was about to do. The pre-wedding event was scheduled for the following Friday. It would be held in the ballroom of an exclusive club on the Upper East Side, a place Megan had chosen herself. About 80 guests were expected, close family from both sides, Philip's partners, Megan's important colleagues, and influential friends of the couple. It was to be an elegant celebration, the kind of event that ended up in the society pages. The night before the event, Philip barely slept. Lying next to Megan, who slept peacefully, he mentally rehearsed every step of his plan. Did he have doubts? Yes, many. Was he scared? Absolutely. But he was convinced it was the right thing to do. Friday arrived, sunny and warm. Megan was radiant, excited about the party that night. She spent the day at the salon, then went to pick up the dress she would wear. Philip accompanied her on a few errands, keeping up the facade until the very last moment. At 7 in the evening, they began to arrive at the club. The Martilisio ballroom was impeccably decorated. White flowers everywhere, soft lighting, elegantly set tables. A string quartet played classical music softly. Guests arrived smiling, congratulating the couple, wishing them happiness. Philip greeted everyone mechanically. He saw his firm's partners, their conservative parents who had always valued appearances above all else. He saw Megan's friends, all flawless in their designer dresses. He saw her family, the New York elite who prided themselves on their lineage and connections. He also saw his mother, sitting discreetly at a table in the back, observing everything with that silent wisdom she always had. When everyone had arrived, and the event was in full swing, the MC announced that the groom would like to make a toast. Megan smiled, thinking it would be one of the traditional romantic speeches. The guests picked up their champagne glasses and turned to the small stage where Philip was climbing. He stood there for a moment, looking at all those people. His heart was beating so hard it felt like everyone could hear it. He held a small remote control connected to the ballroom's projection system. Over the past 2 weeks, he had mentally rehearsed this moment hundreds of times. But now, actually being there, he felt the true weight of what he was about to do. He took a deep breath and began to speak. Good evening, everyone. First, I'd like to thank you for being here to share this moment with us. I know many of you traveled from far away, rearranged your schedules, and that means a lot. He paused. Megan watched him with a proud smile. But I need to be honest with you. And most importantly, I need to be honest with myself. Megan's smile faltered slightly. A few guests exchanged confused glances. In the last few weeks, I went through an experience that completely changed my perspective on many things, on values, on character, on what really matters in a relationship and in life. Philip looked directly at Megan. I discovered truths that cannot be ignored. Megan stood up from her table, visibly disturbed. Philip, what are you doing? He didn't answer. Instead, he pressed the button on the remote. The ballroom lights dimmed, and a large screen behind him lit up. The first video began to play. It was a scene from Megan's office. She was speaking to a cleaning lady, a middle-aged woman who had accidentally spilled a little water on the floor. Megan reprimanded her with a harshness that made several guests' eyes widen. The words were cruel, the tone demeaning. The employee was visibly embarrassed. This was recorded 2 weeks ago, Philip explained, but it's not an isolated incident. Another video started, Megan treating a delivery guy poorly, then another of her ridiculing a doorman. One more, where she made derogatory comments about the cleaning staff to her friends. In each video, the difference between the public Megan and the private Megan was starkly clear. The ballroom was completely silent. Megan was pale, her hands trembling. Philip, for God's sake, where did you get this? I was there, Philip said calmly. For 2 weeks I went undercover as a janitor. I worked in your building, Megan. I saw everything. I lived it. A murmur of shock rippled through the room. Some people rose from their chairs. Megan's mother brought a hand to her mouth, stunned. Philip continued, I discovered that the person I thought I knew only exists when there's an important audience. I discovered that the woman I plan to marry treats human beings like disposable objects, depending on how much power or status they have. Megan tried to defend herself. You don't understand, you're twisting things, But Philip cut her off, his voice still calm but firm. And I also discovered that you're having an affair with someone named Richard. He then played the audio from the elevator conversation. Megan's voice was unmistakable, intimate, arranging a date, saying she had to be discreet because Philip was traveling. Megan collapsed into her chair, tears starting to stream down her face. Her parents looked on in horror. Her friends whispered among themselves. The guests didn't know where to look. "I'm not doing this for revenge," Philip said, his voice now thick with emotion. "I'm doing this because I can't live a lie. I can't marry someone who has two faces, who treats people differently depending on what she can gain from them." He looked over at Ms. Rose, who was sitting at a side table. He had specially invited her to be there. She gave him an encouraging nod. "These past 2 weeks taught me more about humanity than my entire life before. I learned that dignity has no price, that true character is shown in how we treat those who can offer us nothing in return." Philip paused, swallowing the lump in his throat. "Therefore I cannot go through with this wedding. I cannot share my life with someone who only recognizes humanity when status is involved." The silence in the ballroom was deafening. Megan was sobbing openly now, her face buried in her hands. Her mother tried to comfort her, but also seemed to be in a state of shock. "I apologize to everyone here for the embarrassment," Philip continued. "I know this isn't ideal, but I felt I needed to be transparent, that you all deserve to know the truth." He stepped down from the stage and walked to Helen, who hugged him tightly. "You did the right thing, my son," she whispered in his ear. The room erupted in conversation. Some guests got up to leave, others remained frozen in their chairs. Megan's parents tried to control the situation, asking people to remain calm. Her friends surrounded Megan, who was inconsolable. One of Philip's partners, a conservative man who had always been critical of change, approached him. "You know this is going to have consequences, don't you? For your reputation, for the company." "I know," Philip replied, "and I'm prepared to deal with them." Another, younger partner squeezed his shoulder. That was brave, hard but brave. Philip left the ballroom with his mother and a few friends who understood his actions. He could hear the chaos he was leaving behind, crying, heated arguments, phones ringing. He knew that by the end of the night the video would be circulating, that by tomorrow it would be news. In the car, Helen held her son's hand. "It's going to be difficult from now on." "I know, Mom, but you did what was right and that's what matters." Philip nodded, looking out the window at the passing city. New York was still alive out there, indifferent to personal dramas. But for him, everything had changed. There was no going back. Arriving home, the apartment he shared with Megan felt strange and empty. She certainly wouldn't be coming back there tonight. Philip packed a few clothes in a bag and went to a hotel. He couldn't sleep there, surrounded by memories of a life that no longer existed. In the hotel room, finally alone, Philip let the emotions wash over him. He cried. Not so much for the loss of Megan, but for the end of a dream, an illusion. He cried for the weight of what he had done, for the consequences he knew would come. But he also felt a strange relief, as if he had dropped an immense burden he hadn't realized he was carrying. He checked his phone. Dozens of messages, some of support, others of fierce criticism. The video was already circulating on social media. Comments were divided. Some called him a hero, others cruel and vengeful. Megan had already posted a statement denying everything, claiming she was the victim of a smear campaign that Philip had fabricated everything out of jealousy. But the videos were too clear, the evidence irrefutable, and the people who worked in that building were starting to speak out, confirming Megan's behavior. The truth was coming out, and there was no hiding it anymore. Among the messages, one in particular caught his eye. It was from Ms. Rose. "Mr. Miller, thank you so much for inviting me to be there today. You are a true man. God bless your courage. We are all praying for you." Philip felt his eyes burn again. That simple woman had more nobility in one sentence than many of the guests at that party had in their entire lives. Another message was from one of the janitors he had worked with, a young man named Ryan. "Dude, I saw the video. Can't believe that was you. Now I get why you were always so cool to us. Mad respect, man. You showed you're the real deal." Philip replied to a few messages, thanking them for their support. He ignored the criticism. He knew he couldn't control the narrative that would form around what he had done. Some would see him as a vigilante, others as cruel. The truth was he simply couldn't live a lie anymore. He thought about what tomorrow would be like. The office would surely be in an uproar. The partners would call emergency meetings. There would be pressure for him to resign, or at least take a leave of absence until the dust settled. The company valued its corporate image above all else, and scandals were not welcome. But Philip had already anticipated this. He had already spoken with some of the more progressive partners, planted seeds of change. If they tried to force him out, he wouldn't go quietly. He had real plans for change. During those 2 weeks working as an invisible man, he had seen up close the reality that many pretended not to see. He wanted to implement concrete changes at the company. Appreciation programs for service staff, scholarships for the children of vulnerable workers, clear policies against discrimination and emotional abuse. He also thought about Megan. Despite everything, he didn't feel hatred for her. He felt a deep sadness, an immense disappointment. Part of him still loved the woman he met at the beginning of their relationship, or at least he loved the idea of her. Dawn arrived, and Philip was still awake. He went to the hotel window. Below, New York slept its restless sleep. The city never truly stopped. The phone rang, pulling Philip from his thoughts. It was almost 5 in the morning. He saw the name on the screen. Richard, the man Megan was having an affair with. Philip hesitated but answered. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was tense. "Philip, it's Richard. I saw the videos. I need to talk to you." "I don't think we have anything to talk about, Richard. Please, just hear me out. Megan told me you two had been separated for months, that you were only keeping up the facade for business reasons. She said you knew. I never would have gotten involved if I knew it was a lie." Philip took a deep breath. Richard was just another victim of Megan's manipulations. "Richard, I don't blame you. She's convincing. Believe me, I know." "What are you going to do now?" "Move on. Try to make something good come out of this whole mess." Philip thanked him and hung up. Another twist in a night full of them. But in a way that conversation made him feel lighter. Philip turned off his phone and lay down on the hotel bed. Outside, New York was still alive, and tomorrow would be another day. A day without certainties, without the comfort of set plans. But it would be a day of truth, and for Philip, that was now worth more than anything. He closed his eyes, exhausted but at peace. The worst was over. Or so he thought, because the true consequences of his actions were still to come. The morning light filtered through the hotel room curtains when Philip finally managed to sleep. But the rest was short-lived. At 8 a.m., his phone began to ring incessantly. It was the firm's partners, journalists asking for interviews, acquaintances wanting details, lawyers offering their services. Philip ignored most of the calls. He took a long shower, trying to wash away the exhaustion and tension that clung to his body. When he got out and checked his phone again, he saw the story had exploded on social media. The video of the revelation was everywhere. News sites had already published articles. Megan's name was a trending topic. 2 narratives were forming. One group of people saw him as courageous, someone who had exposed hypocrisy and elitism. They shared their own stories of being mistreated by people in positions of power. They praised his courage for going undercover to find the truth. They said more people needed to do this to reveal the true character of those hiding behind facades. But there was also another narrative, strong and virulent. This group accused him of being cruel, vengeful, of staging a situation just to publicly humiliate Megan. They said he could have simply ended the relationship privately, that the public exposure was unnecessary and sadistic. Some even suggested the videos were doctored, digital manipulations created to destroy Megan's reputation. Philip knew this would happen. No matter what he did, there would always be dissenters. The important thing was knowing, in his heart, that he had done what he believed was right. At 10 a.m., he received a call from Albert Foster, the firm's majority partner. His voice was cold, professional. "Philip, we need to talk, urgently. I'm calling an emergency board meeting for this afternoon. Your presence is mandatory." Philip agreed. He knew he would face resistance, but he was prepared. He arrived at the office at noon. The atmosphere was tense. Employees looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and respect. Some averted their eyes, embarrassed. Others gave him small nods of support. Philip noticed that the cleaning staff, those who were normally invisible, now looked at him differently. There was recognition in their eyes, a silent connection. Ms. Bennett, one of the janitors who had worked in the building for over 20 years, approached him in the hallway. Her eyes were moist. "Mr. Miller," she said softly, "what you did, it was so important. We who work in these places, we see so much, but nobody ever cares. You cared. Thank you." Philip squeezed her hand warmly. "I'm the one who should be thanking you, Ms. Bennett, for showing me what true dignity is." The meeting began at 2 p.m. The 6 main partners of the firm were present. The mood was heavy. Albert Foster opened the conversation directly. "Philip, you've created an extremely delicate situation for this company. Our image is now associated with this scandal. We have clients calling, asking about our position, worried investors. This is unacceptable." Philip remained calm. "I understand the concern, Albert, but what I did was expose a truth that needed to come to light. Not about the company, but about personal values I cannot compromise." Another partner, Morris Sanders, a conservative man in his 60s, slammed his hand on the table. "Personal values. You set an elaborate trap, publicly humiliated your fiancée, and created a media circus. This reflects poorly on all of us." "With all due respect, Morris," Philip replied, his tone firm but polite, "what I exposed was a pattern of discriminatory and disrespectful behavior. And if that reflects poorly on anyone, it's on those who normalize that kind of treatment." There was an awkward silence. Philip continued, "And since we're talking about values, I think it's time we discuss the values of our own company. During my 2 weeks working undercover, I observed realities we normally ignore. Employees working in precarious conditions, being treated as invisible, having no voice." "That's irrelevant to this discussion," Albert interrupted. "It's not irrelevant," Philip insisted. "It's essential. If we want to be a company that prides itself on its values, we need to ensure those values extend to everyone. Not just the executives, not just the important clients, but every single person who works here." Roger Adams, one of the younger, more progressive partners, spoke up. "Philip has a point. We talk a lot about corporate social responsibility, but in practice, what are we really doing?" The discussion went on for hours. There were tense moments, veiled accusations, subtle threats. But Philip didn't back down. He presented concrete proposals, creating an ethics committee with representation from employees at all levels, scholarship programs for employees' families, and a review of policies regarding the treatment and appreciation of all staff, regardless of their position. In the end, he secured the support of 3 of the 6 partners. It wasn't a majority, but it was enough to start making some changes. Albert Foster reluctantly agreed to allow a pilot program, but he made it clear that Philip would be under constant scrutiny. In the following days, Philip's life became a whirlwind. The story continued to reverberate. TV shows wanted to interview him. Social media influencers commented on the case. Psychologists and sociologists used the situation as an example in discussions about social class and empathy. Philip declined all interviews. He didn't want to turn it into a spectacle. It wasn't about him, it was about the message, about making people reflect on how they treated others. But it wasn't all positive. A smear campaign began to emerge against him. Deceptively edited videos circulated on social media, suggesting Philip had ulterior motives, that he was a manipulator, that he had abused his position to spy on Meghan. Some of her influential friends started spreading rumors about Philip's character, saying he was unstable, obsessive, with a history of controlling behavior. Meghan gave a tearful interview on a popular television show, claiming to be the victim of a cruel persecution. She admitted she might have been harsh with employees at times, but only because she was a perfectionist and never intended to hurt anyone. As for the infidelity, she denied it completely, saying Richard was just a friend and their conversations had been taken out of context. She cried as she said she loved Philip and didn't understand why he had done this to her. Public opinion became even more divided. Many believed Meghan, moved by her tears. Others maintained their support for Philip, saying the evidence was too clear to be ignored. Philip watched the interview alone in the new apartment he had rented. He felt a pang of pain seeing Megan cry. There were still feelings there, remnants of a love that was once real, or at least seemed to be. But above those feelings was the certainty that he had made the right choice. The weeks passed. Philip immersed himself in the work of implementing the changes he had proposed. He created a working group with representatives from different departments of the company. He included Ms. Bennett and other janitors, security guards and receptionists, people who would normally never have a voice in corporate decisions. There was resistance, of course. Some managers complained it was a waste of time, that lower-level employees didn't have the knowledge to contribute to business decisions. But Philip insisted, and surprisingly, their contributions were valuable. The workers had unique perspectives on efficiency, waste, and problems that executives never noticed. Within 2 months, they launched the first scholarship program. 10 children of janitorial and security staff received full scholarships for technical courses and college prep. The award ceremony was emotional. Philip saw parents crying with gratitude, young people with their eyes shining with hope. That was worth more than any quarterly profit. They also created a clear policy against discrimination and emotional abuse. Any employee, regardless of their position, could anonymously report improper treatment. 3 managers were reprimanded in the first few months. 1 was fired for repeated offenses. The message was clear. Respect was not optional. Slowly, the company's culture began to change. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't fast, but it was real. And other companies started to take notice. Some competitors implemented similar programs. Universities invited Philip to speak on corporate ethics and social responsibility. He accepted a few invitations, always emphasizing that he wasn't a hero, just someone who had the opportunity to see a reality he normally ignored. 3 months after the scandal, Philip was leaving the office late when he saw her. Megan was standing in front of the building, clearly waiting for him. She looked different, thinner, with dark circles under her eyes, without her usual flawless makeup. She wore simple clothes, a far cry from the designer dresses she used to wear. Philip hesitated but approached her. They stood there looking at each other in silence for a few seconds. It was Megan who spoke first. "Hi, Philip." "Hi, Megan. What are you doing here?" "I needed to see you. To talk for real. No cameras, no lawyers, no social media." Philip nodded. They went to a nearby coffee shop, quiet at that time of night. They sat at a table in the back. Megan ordered just a black coffee. Philip noticed her hands were trembling slightly as she held the cup. "I lost everything," she began, her voice low. "I lost my job. I lost most of my friends. My parents barely speak to me. My life has been turned upside down." Philip said nothing, just listened. "I was so angry at you at first. So angry. I thought you were cruel, that you had destroyed me for revenge. I spent weeks playing the victim, believing I was the wronged one in this story." She paused, wiping away a tear. "But then when everything fell apart, when I found myself truly alone, without the spotlight, without the status, I was forced to look at myself. And you know what I saw? Someone I didn't like very much." Philip felt a tightness in his chest. There was a sincerity in her words he had never heard from Megan before. "I grew up learning that the world was divided into winners and losers, important people and disposable people. I learned that being kind to those who could offer me nothing in return was a weakness. That status was everything." She looked at Philip with red-rimmed eyes. "And I treated people horribly. Not just employees, but so many people. And the worst part? I didn't even realize it. To me, it was normal. It was just how things worked." "And now?" Philip asked softly. "Now I'm trying to change, for real. Not because of the cameras or public opinion, but because I saw who I was and I was disgusted. I started therapy. I went back to school. I got a simple job at an NGO that works on social inclusion. I don't make much, but I'm learning a lot." Megan reached her hand across the table, almost touching Philip's. "I know I ruined everything. I know there's no going back. But I needed to tell you. You were right. About everything, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Philip looked at the woman he once loved, who he thought he knew, who he discovered was so different from what he had imagined. And he saw, perhaps for the first time, something genuine. a real, not performative vulnerability. "Megan, I believe you're trying to change, and I'm rooting for you, I really am." She smiled faintly, hopefully. "Does that mean—" "But it doesn't mean we can go back," Philip finished, gently but firmly. "What we had was built on a false foundation, on masks and performances. To start something real, we would have to get to know each other all over again from scratch, and honestly, I don't think that's the right path for either of us." Megan lowered her head, fresh tears falling. "I understand." "Besides," Philip continued, "regret isn't the same as transformation. You regret it because you were exposed, because you suffered consequences. And that's a start. But true empathy, true change, has to come from within. It has to be unconditional. It has to happen even when no one is watching." Megan nodded, wiping her tears. "You were always wise. I never valued that enough." They sat in silence for a few minutes. Then Megan stood up. "I should go. Thank you for talking to me. And Philip, thank you for showing me the truth. It hurt more than anything has ever hurt in my life. But I needed to see it." Philip stood up too. For a moment, he considered hugging her, but he just nodded. Megan left the coffee shop and Philip watched her disappear into the New York night. He felt a mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness for the definitive end of a chapter. Relief for knowing he had made peace with that decision. The following months brought more changes. The company, under the renewed leadership of Philip and the progressive partners, became a benchmark for social responsibility. Other organizations sought their advice on how to implement similar programs. Philip became a respected voice in discussions on corporate ethics and empathy in the workplace. Ms. Rose, the janitor who had been kind to him during his time undercover, was promoted to supervisor of a new mentorship program where veteran employees helped new hires adapt. Mr. Davis received special recognition for years of service and quiet leadership. Ms. Bennett saw her daughter get a full scholarship to a university through the program Philip created. Philip also changed personally. He became more present, more attentive to the people around him. He never again walked past a worker without greeting them. He never again ignored someone because their job was considered inferior. He had learned, in the most visceral way possible, that dignity has no hierarchy. A year after the scandal, Philip was in his office when he received an unexpected call. It was Megan. Her tone was different, lighter, more genuine. "Philip, I know you asked me not to call, but I had to tell you. I got accepted into a social psychology program. I start next semester. I want to work with inclusion, with breaking down social barriers." Philip smiled. "That's wonderful, Megan. Truly. And I met someone. He works at the NGO with me. He's simple, kind, and teaches me every day about real empathy. I don't know if it will work out, but it's different, it's real. I'm happy for you, I really am." There was a pause. Then Megan said, "You know, I spent a long time hating you for what you did, but now I thank you. You saved me from myself. You forced me to look at the ugly parts I was hiding. It was painful but necessary." When they hung up, Philip stared out his office window. The city of New York stretched out below, vibrant and chaotic as ever. Millions of stories unfolding simultaneously. Millions of people fighting their own battles. He thought about how everything had changed, how one bold decision born of pain and doubt had transformed not only his life but the lives of so many others. The scholarships he created had already helped 50 young people. The appreciation programs had been replicated in other companies. The conversation about empathy and respect in the corporate world was more present than ever. But more important than all of that, Philip had learned a lesson he would carry with him forever. A person's true character is revealed not in how they treat those who can offer them something, but in how they treat those who have nothing to offer in return. Those painful days, disguised and invisible, had been the most transformative of his life. He had lost a love, or at least the illusion of one. But he had gained something far more valuable, the ability to see people for who they truly are. To recognize dignity where society taught him to see only a function, and when, years later, he looked back, he would know that this was the moment his life truly began. Not as Philip Miller, the successful executive, but as Philip Miller, the human being, who learned that respect and empathy aren't grand gestures, but quiet, daily choices. Life went on. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, months into years. But Philip never forgot. He never forgot Miss Rose and her motherly embrace. He never forgot Mr. Davis and his fair-minded sternness. He never forgot Miss Bennet and her tears of gratitude. And every time he passed a worker who was invisible to most, Philip would stop. He would greet them. He would thank them. He would acknowledge them, because he had learned that seeing people, truly seeing them, was the most human act of all. And so, from a story of pain and revelation, a life of purpose and consciousness was born. A life Philip never would have imagined living, but one he now couldn't imagine living any other way. End of story. And to our listeners, we hope the story of Philip and Meghan has touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of discovery, transformation, and humanity, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what resonated with you the most. Every day we bring you intense stories like this one, revealing the deepest side of the human soul, making us reflect on who we are and how we treat the people around us. We'll see you in the next episode.